Hello, everybody, and welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live video series. And with me today to share the stories behind the 10 books that had the most significant impact on his life path is Gong wellness, movement and recovery teacher, Stephen Washington. And as I said in our email, if you're a follower of Lee Harris, you will be familiar with Stephen, who's been teaching Qigong alongside Lee Harris at Lee's Energy Mastery events since 2015. A certified Qigong instructor, Stephen has taught groups and individuals for over 20 years in Pilates, dance, physical fitness, and Qigong. And his study of Chinese medicine and certification as a neuromuscular massage therapist has added to his knowledge of the human body. In his one-on-one sessions, Stephen has found this gentle movement practice, which I know many are familiar with, to be a brilliant, effective tool for empaths and intuitives to balance themselves and shift energy within their body. So with that, Stephen Washington, welcome and thank you for joining us today. So good to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Sandy. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I just love the sound of your voice. It's so soothing. It's perfect voice to just wrap me up this morning. It's just fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for that. I mean, you know, I always tend to think when I listen to it, it doesn't sound like I would want it to, but I'm glad you're enjoying it. It must be the accent, I think.
Oh, it's the tone. It's the tone as well. It's the tone.
Oh, well, that's good to know. Yeah, I guess as a somebody who's very tuned into music and dance and energy, that would be quite important to you.
Oh, absolutely. Sound is very important to me. There's something that's interesting. I complimented you on your voice, and also, you know, through my life, a lot of people have always complimented me on my voice, my speaking voice, and so I've just learned to pay attention to the tone of people's voices, because I often wonder, well, why is it that people enjoy the sound of my voice? Why is it that they enjoy the tone of it? Why does it inspire a sense of relaxation or safety or calm? And I think I complimented you because I recognized that in you as well in this moment.
I think, yes. I mean, we don't think about the frequency, do we? I mean, we're transmitting something, you know, while we're speaking, we're transmitting something completely different as well, you know, that's telegraphing things about ourselves, I think. I know that I certainly listen for authenticity, and I find it not necessarily in the voice, but it's on the frequency that is being carried, you know, by the voice.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, let's start. Sorry, go ahead.
No,
you've got something to say there. Say it.
And then also for me being married to Lee Harris, who you know, makes his living by using his voice in so many different ways, and has a vast library of recordings of his voice. He has clued me into so many specifics about the voice and the sound of a voice, the recording of a voice, certain qualities that I just would never have considered before. So now it's educated in my ear as well. So anyway, let's move forward.
Okay, so we always start with two important questions, and the first is, what do books mean to you?
What do books mean to me? Escape. Adventure. It allows me to, some ways, what comes to me right now is allows me to be a fly on the wall, perhaps in the life of another person, whether it's a real person or a fictional character. And it gives me the opportunity, they give me the opportunity to just see the world in a different way.
So
Seeing the
it's,
world in a different way than my own experience and my own view of the world.
yeah, a few people have commented on books being doorways. You know, they open up doors, don't they? To
Yes.
other experiences, things that we may never get to experience ourselves, but through those other people's experiences, we can learn empathy and gain understanding. Mm. What What was this process like for you? You know, having to revisit the past and pick out 10 books. How did you find that?
Oh, it was many things. At first, there was moments when it was just kind of challenging for me because I had to just think back to some of the books that I've read that were impactful enough for me to remember them all these years later, that they put some sort of a stamp on me. So that was interesting to do that. It was actually kind of fun to think back to certain books at certain times in my life and to remember what my life was like at that moment when that book entered my life. That was an interesting journey as well. Quite a sensory experience,
Mm.
which was great. For instance, there's one of the books that we're going to talk about today that I read when I was a teenager, and I would go to the library to read it because I didn't have a copy of it of my own. And I just remember I have all these memories of the library at the time in my hometown and which stairwells I had to walk down in order to get to that section of the library where the book was located. What aisle I had to go down in order to find it, what the lighting was like sometimes when I would, you know, in that area of the library, maybe even what it sounded like being there, which is quite a journey. I mean, I'm 48 years old, and maybe that book entered my life when I was 15. So,
Wow.
so to think about that again was just really a breathtaking experience.
You know, the whole thing about going to the library to read the book is interesting because, you know, mostly we've got a book at home, we curl up on the sofa, we don't have to walk very far. But actually going to the library to read a specific book, you know, it's a very committed experience. And if that book is something that has life-changing information, then you have that period of leaving the library and going back home, you know, that time, however long it takes, to mull over that experience, you know, before you get too many distractions. And I think that must give it a whole other impact, you know, especially if you've read something that really blew your mind or
Mm-hmm.
really impacted you.
Absolutely. I grew up in a small town, well, smallish town. Stamford, Connecticut is a smallish town. It's a lot of corporations are there. So it's not a New York City, but it's, you know, it's like a mini New York City. And I grew up downtown in an apartment building, and the library was just maybe a 10-minute walk from my house. Uh, and it's interesting. I had a library card. I suppose I could have taken the book out, but the book was definitely more for more mature eyes than my own. So I think for me, at that time, I didn't want anyone to see that I was reading that book. So I couldn't take it home and sit in my bed and curl up and read it the way maybe I would have read some other books at the time. Because that book that I'm referring to was about the experience of a homosexual man and being such a young person, still trying to figure out what that was and who I was at that point. And um, yeah, I think taking it home would have been quite a commitment.
Mm.
um,
So
so I
that
felt
book
safe.
was The Sexual Outlaw, yes,
Yeah,
by
yeah,
John Ricci. Yeah.
yes,
So
yeah.
then, given what you've just said, that must have been a very impactful experience for you, sitting in that library, reading that book at the age of 15.
Yeah. Well, it was opening up a whole other world to me, although be it a very specific viewpoint of a particular world, um, because the book there were a lot of sexual acts and overtones within the book, um, things that I had never experienced, had yet to experience in my life up to that point. But I knew that I was gay. I knew I was different, and I knew that there weren't many examples of that around me to observe, to find some sort of kinship with, to gain more knowledge and understanding. But there was that book, and that book gave me something that I clearly needed at the time. It gave me a bit of a refuge. It also just ignited my fantasy world in my head, in terms of, because that is also the time when you start to, there's so much happening in the body of a 15-year-old.
Yes. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it needed some sort of an outlet, and that was one of my outlets, and it felt
And
safe to do it.
yeah, yeah. Yes, I can imagine. Well, let's. So that was book number 2 on your list, and I don't think that your list was in any particular order. So I'm going to go back to what was number 1 on the list, which was Codependent No More: How to Stop Controlling Others and Start Caring for Yourself, which was published in 1986. What was it about this particular book that impacted you so much?
I just knew at a very young age that there was something different about my family. Something very different about my family, and that the workings of my family wasn't quite normal. There was something about it that didn't feel comfortable. Um, and I don't know how I discovered that book, perhaps at the library as well. I don't know, or wandering around the bookstore, maybe in the self-help section. And I read the back cover of it, and it just had a lot of resonance with me, especially when I looked at the relationship that I had with my mother. And I just knew that this book could provide some answers to some questions that I had, and maybe even questions that I didn't really know that I had. But when I would flip through the pages, I knew that that would happen, and there would be resonance, and some of those questions would be answered, or at least would lead me to the next place, or the next thought that I needed to have to find some sort of gain some sort of understanding of the dynamics, the very complex dynamics of human relationships.
Mm, yeah. So book number 3, I think everybody here, or most of the people here, will appreciate this one. One Day My Soul Just Opened Up by Iyanla Vanzant. We all so enjoyed having Iyanla here with us, some months ago. And it is a beautiful book. What did it mean to you?
Well, it meant a lot to me that a Black woman wrote it.
Yeah.
As a young person, it meant a lot to me. I think by the time I found that book, I was in my 20s. And I think I was living in New York City by that point, and on my spiritual journey of my own. And that book just meant some sort of liberation, or some sort of guidance for me, and how to navigate this planet, being a sensitive person, because I thought that some of the things that she said in the book felt very personal to me. Some of the writing exercises just felt very useful to me. I felt like that book was just like a warm blanket that I could wrap myself in. And I think I needed that. And what comes to mind right now also is there's something very maternal about Iyanla,
Oh, yeah.
you know, and I think at that time, I so needed that. I so needed that.
She is like everybody's mother, isn't she? I mean, you just get that feeling that, you know, if you met her, you know, as a stranger, she'd wrap her arms around you.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful lady. Book number 4. Now, this is a novel. She's Come Undone by Wally Lamb, published in 1996. And I haven't read this book, but I've read some interesting things about this book, which make me wonder, you know, what did you find in this book?
Well, the book was introduced to me on the Oprah Winfrey Show, because by this point she had started her book club, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
and I just thought it would be a great opportunity to just read some interesting books, and I just trusted Oprah's taste in books and just her interest in books, and so I decided to read this book, and I found it interesting that it was written by a man, but told the story told from the perspective of a woman, of a young woman, a very complicated woman, um, who had a lot of destructive uh, habits and patterns of behavior. And for me, there was a part of me that identified with her in that, because I was at the very beginning of my journey with some of my destructive behaviors in life. And there was just something about it that was, I don't know, it was a book that just allowed me to just lose myself in. Once I opened that book and started turning the pages, I kept turning until I was done. I couldn't stop. I found it to be that engaging. And so, yeah, so much so that it it led me to his next novel as well. So yeah, it was just very impactful for me at that time. And I made the connection right now just because of, in terms of finding some sort of identification with the main character's destructive behavior, growth and evolution, self-healing. That was very inspiring to me.
So you actually took something away. It wasn't a novel that you read just because it was a great read. You took something away from that novel.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. For those who don't know, it is a coming of age story, and it is about a woman who they they say a heartbreakingly comical heroine,
Hmm.
fragile but also hard-edged cynic, so tough to love, yet so inimitably lovable. She's a poignantly real as our own imperfections, and she comes undone. It includes a promise that we will never forget her. Do you think that's true, that you will never forget that character?
I'll never forget her.
Oh, well, I'll have to read that book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, the next one is another incredible writer. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou, 1984. Now, interestingly, I've read so many mixed reviews about this book, and some actually said that it was incomprehensible. Tell us what you thought of it.
Well, I love Maya Angelou. I love her, and getting to know her more through Oprah Winfrey was very impactful for me. Much like Iyanla Van Zant, she was a very maternal figure on a as a celebrity. She was quite and a writer. She was quite a maternal figure, and it was just, again, there was just something about reading her work that connected me to her, to that feminine energy. And I think I was also at a time when I was reading more books by Black authors, to just be so impressed by a woman, a female writer, a Black female writer who had such a gift of storytelling, that it just spoke to me. And that was just the first of several books that I read of hers. And I don't know what else to say about it.
You did say that it gave your experience as a black man validation, that she was a mirror of sorts for
Yeah.
you, that she and you knew what it was like to feel the sting of systemic racism, but you felt less alone in your challenges having
Yeah.
read that book.
Yeah, this is true. Thank you for reminding me of that.
I mean, at the time you read that book, what were you doing? Were you dancing on Broadway? Were you traveling, touring in shows?
No, I hadn't gotten to the point of dancing on Broadway by that point. I think I was still in my early years as a dancer in New York City, probably probably living in an apartment in Brooklyn, sharing it with 2 or 3 other people, paying very little rent, piecing together a living on dancing and waiting tables or working in a store. Um, Living in New York City, which is a very different time to live in New York City than it is today.
Mm-hmm.
You can be an art. You could be an artist and live in New York City and survive and do well. Now it's maybe a bit more challenging. Yeah. So there was a sense of, I don't know. At that time in my life, there was a sense of adventure and discovery, certainly, at being a young dancer in New York City, having all these different experiences as an artist, as a professional artist. Uh, and
Was that your primary ambition at that point in time, to be a dancer?
Absolutely, yeah.
What is it about dancing that you love? What does dancing do for you?
Well, it's transcendent. It's transcendent. It's primal. It allows me to, whenever I'm dancing, it allows me to fully feel my body, feel present. It allows me to just move energy through my body. One thing that I've grown to understand about myself is that I am an energetic being, and if I don't move my body, energy will get stuck, or energy will become stagnant. Where if I don't have some sort of release valve, it's very uncomfortable. And so I think my higher power knew what it was doing when it gave me the gift of dance. Is that, oh, he's going to need some way to release this energy, so let's let's make him a dancer. Let's make him um, interested and drawn to that, because he's going to need a way to navigate this dense plane.
Mm.
And so
I've
that's
seen
what dance gave to
you
me.
dancing on the videos of Lee's songs, and there is something ineffable about it. The way you move, you are transported. It's like you are just so free and so expressive that, I wonder what that must be like, to be in a body like that can just move, along with the music, on the music, on the voice, on the, and not, it's almost like there's a sense of, you leave the body behind and it becomes something else.
Well, thank you very much for that. It's interesting hearing you say that, because it's something that dance, and for my body, for me, is something that I'm just so accustomed to. I take it for granted.
Mm.
Um, and how I feel about dance today is different from how I felt about it when I was in my teens and in my 20s, or even my 30s. It's it's evolved, and it's different. It's interesting how what comes to mind right now is what it's like to be a dancer and to work to be a working dancer, working artist, um, and then to have had a career and have dance be a thread that runs through my life, but in a very different way. I don't dance to earn a living anymore. I don't take dance classes anymore. I just dance when the spirit just moves me.
Yes.
And it's in a very unstructured way. And sometimes I don't feel like dancing. People think because I was a dancer that I must always want to dance.
Mm.
And I don't always feel like dancing. It's funny, and I'll tell this, and I don't know if Lee would mind me saying this. When we were filming at least one of the videos, music videos, I didn't really want to do it. Like, I knew that once the cameras would roll, I would find what I needed to do it. But I was a very reluctant dancer on the set.
Well, it didn't show in the finished video that I
I know,
watched.
that you just trust the gift within you to show up and do what it's supposed to do. But that's also an indication for me of just that's just part of my makeup. That is my destiny. That it is such a deep part of me that I don't have to understand it, control it. It's there to do what it's supposed to do.
Mm.
And it's okay if there's a part of me somewhere in my mind and my body and my spirit that doesn't feel like doing it in the moment, because the body, my energy knows what to do.
Yeah.
In the right circumstances.
I'm curious to know the difference between that kind of free form expressive dancing, where you're free to move your body however you choose. What is the difference between that and when you're dancing in a show and it's choreographed and you have to, the dance has to be the same as, the movement has to be the same as everyone else's?
Well, I think what comes to mind is the fact that, yes, in a production like The Lion King or any other piece of choreography that I danced, made by one of the many choreographers that I've worked with over the years. Yes, there are the steps, but you need something to bring the steps to life, and the energy to bring the steps, the movement to life. And how I bring it to life is different from how you would bring it to life, or any other person would bring it to life. So there is something within that requires a freedom of expression, whether it's how one breathes through the phrases, how one moves the head in a slightly different way, how one takes a millisecond of more or less of a pause in between movements, whether it's a facial expression that you use in a certain moment that you feel inspired to do, but in another moment you wouldn't, or you don't. All of those things coming together create a different energy and a different experience. Both are just as beautiful, just as valuable, just as expressive, but it's just different. It's almost like a color, and a color that has many different shades. Like, they're orange, but there are many different shades of orange, and they're all very beautiful and all very warm, but some might be a bit cooler than warm, but still warm.
Mm.
Or richer,
When you were dancing in The Lion King, were you aware of yourself embodying the character, the animal, whoever the character of in the same way that actors do? I wonder, do dancers embody the character as well? Are
Absolutely.
you aware of being a lion or some other kind of creature?
Absolutely. And in that particular production, it was so important to embody the characters, the animals, and what Julie Taymor wanted from the performers were to embody the animals and to become one with the puppetry. That, like, there, for instance, I'm thinking there was one number where we would wear hyena costumes, and whenever we were to dance, the dancers, the male dancers, we had to tilt our head downward so that you could see the face of the mask more and lose the person. So that was a physical posture that helped us to embody the characters even more. So if you have this very effective, very imaginative, very ornate representation of a hyena here, and then you add all of these different gestures, it gives you a window to embody these animals that, of course, none of us have any idea what it's like to be a hyena.
Yeah.
But we can guess, we can mimic. So yeah.
It's fascinating. I know nothing about the world of dance, nothing at all. So it's fascinating to hear you talk about it.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk about it, because I don't get to talk about it often.
No, I can imagine. So let's move on to book number 6, which is Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison, which was published in 1977.
Much like Maya Angelou's work, I think that Toni Morrison gave me a sense of place and understanding around my experience as a Black man in America. And that I think was important for me at the time in which I read it. I was also just really impressed by this woman as an incredible writer. Toni Morrison was quite a charismatic woman. And to hear her talk about her work was always very moving to me and very engaging. She draws you in to the stories that she tells. Yeah, and I think it was another book that I saw on the Oprah Winfrey Show.
Well, I mean, lots of people have found their books through Oprah Winfrey. She's done a huge amount, for reading.
Yes.
Good for her.
Yeah.
One of the
Good
things,
for all of us, I should say.
Yeah. One of the things that you said in your write-out was about flight as a means of escape and what that meant to you, because you'd already traveled to faraway lands, and flying at thousands of feet was the greatest escape you'd accomplished.
Oh, thank you for reminding me about that. Yes, because she talks a lot about flight in the book. And for me, it was at the beginning of my dance career, and I was traveling a lot. There was something about being able to fly on an airplane to all of these faraway places that allowed me to kind of escape aspects of life. And there's always been something magical and mystical about flying, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And to think of there's so many people on this planet who've never been on an airplane, have never traveled anywhere outside of where they're from, where they live. Yeah, it's just the ability to physically escape, but also what that does to your mind and your imagination.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah. There's something else I want to touch on that you said about this book, and that is the book also explored the theme of abandoned women. And you say that 2 of the central figures in your life had been abandoned by men. And your father abandoned your mother by infidelity and divorce. Your first brother-in-law abandoned your teenage sister, who bore him a child. And you say that culturally, women are often blamed for their abandonment and their struggles during the aftermath of such trauma. I mean, that's a very insightful thing, not just for you to see and understand, to perceive, but to write about.
Oh, wow. As you mentioned that, I can think of more women that have experienced what she wrote about, what my mother experienced, and what my sister experienced as well.
Did her writing about this give you an insight into how the women who had been abandoned must have felt?
Yeah, absolutely. Although every person experiences life in a different way, but absolutely. And perhaps in a way that it gave me a window and an insight into what it must have felt like to have that experience in ways that my sister or my mother would never be able to express to me in the same way. Because I think also sometimes people just don't want to talk about certain things about their lives and their experiences. Or people can be much more guarded And there was just an opportunity for me to just gain a different perspective, because I'll never know. I certainly know what it's like to feel abandoned, but I don't know what it's like to be a woman and to feel abandoned and to be left with children. That's beyond my experience. So again, it was an opportunity to just have empathy for those people in my life, and for other women too who may have gone through that.
Book number 7, this was an interesting one when I checked into it. The Colour of Water, a black man's tribute to his white mother by James McBride. And this was a memoir that touched you, you said, on many levels.
What did I say about it, Sandie?
You said, this memoir touched me on many levels. Yes, he explored racism in this work about his and his family's experience of being biracial and living in New York City during the 60s. He eloquently described what it was like to have a large family, to be raised by his Jewish mother, and that one theme that spoke to you was the heavy burden of secrets, because you knew that secrets were damaging and they were alive and well in your family.
Well, I think that book had resonance for me also because I lived in New York City at that time when I read it. And I think I lived in Harlem, and it allowed me to sort of travel back in time in Harlem when I was reading it. As I walked down certain streets or certain areas were mentioned in the book, all the areas were like close to me. And as far as secrets are concerned, yeah, I just started to understand more that there are a lot of secrets in my family. And even at that time, there were secrets that I didn't even know about that I later discovered many years later. Secrets are the gift that keeps on giving, I guess.
Yeah.
But just how damaging they can be. Damaging for the people that are having this, people who are holding the secret, and the people who are being, lied to. There's a saying that we have in recovery is that we're only as sick as our secrets. And it just reminded me how it just takes a lot of work to keep secrets. It takes a lot of work and energy, and it's wasted work and time and energy.
It is, isn't it? And you said that this book reminded you that secrets from the past live in the present, and they haunt us if we keep them. Yeah. Why do we hang on to them? I shall never know. And there's a very interesting backstory about his family and his mother, who didn't want to admit to being white. And she was Jewish, and I think she had 12 children.
Yeah. Which I couldn't fathom being part of a large family like that. That was another thing about the book that was really interesting, because my family is very small. It was my mom, my dad, my sister, and I. So interesting way of living.
You said interspersed throughout his mother's compelling narrative, McBride shares candid recollections of his own experiences as a mixed-race child of poverty, his flirtations with drugs and violence, and his eventual self-realization and professional success. The Colour of Water touches readers of all colours as a vivid portrait of growing up, a haunting meditation on race and identity, and a lyrical valentine to a mother from her son. That's beautiful writing, Stephen. You've expressed that beautifully.
Thank you.
Yeah, very poetic.
Thank you.
Do you have any aspirations to be a writer?
I do. I write a lot about my own experience. If you go to my website, stephenwashingtonexperience.com, you can see a lot of examples of my writing. Most of my writings are just about my life, my family, my experiences with recovery and addiction. I have a series that I've begun writing called Dear Recovering Soul, that I just talk about life and experiences of recovery, because I feel like we're all recovering from something. I think recovery is just is another word for transition, transformation. We're all recovering from something. So I enjoy telling stories and sharing my experiences and being vulnerable, because I feel like we get so much from one another when we pull back the veil and just reveal what's lying beneath, which is something that we all have in common, all the stuff that's beneath the veneer that we put on every day. And I think that it's just important for me to express.
That's a great title for a book, Stephen. Dear Recovering Soul.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
I'll keep that in mind. I'll keep that in mind.
Do. Yeah. So number 8, Love Without Conditions, Reflections of the Christ Mind by Paul Ferrini. Now, this is a book that was on Iyanla's list. It's on a forthcoming guests list, who also was a student of Iyanla's, and it's one that she insists that every one of her students read. So tell us what you love about this particular book.
Well, it's funny because when I found the book when I was going to a spiritual center in New York City called Sacred Center. And it was strange that I ended up there because many people had told me about this church for a long time. And I was just so against church because I grew up in the church, and I just didn't want to go to a church. But Sacred Center ended up being very different. And by the time I made it to Sacred Center, I was in a different point in my life when I needed that kind of community. And they often would talk about various books, like there would be a book that they would choose every week or every month and just sort of explore, and sometimes it would weave itself into the talks or the sermons. And this was one of the books, one month. And I found it interesting for me to read a channeled book. I didn't know very much about channeling at the time, and that the book was by this man who was channeling Christ. What I found compelling about it was that it was just told or delivered in a way that was able to reach me. Because like I said, I didn't want to have anything to do with church, and I didn't really want to hear much about Christ or anything like that. Having grown up the way that I grew up, and also being in New York City, where you have preachers on street corners and in subway cars holding you hostage to their to their rants and ravings. So so that's the kind of reaction I had. But that book was just something very different and very transformative, and it just allowed me to just view the teachings of Christ in a different way, and to hear it in a different voice, and in a voice that was a bit more in alignment with who I knew myself to be and aspired to be. And it was just told in a very loving, gentle, honest, simple way.
You know, it's that famous picture that looks as though it's the imprint of Christ, you know, on the shroud, but much more clear.
Yes. I've actually read that book several times since I purchased it. I lost it at one point, and then I found it again, ordered it online, and found it again. So yeah, it's a lovely book. Keeper.
So number 9. My goodness, if I had, you know, $100 for every time this one turns up. The 4 Agreements, Don Miguel Ruiz.
Do you like this book?
I do. I love this. I love the simplicity of this book. You know, it's just, you know, pares it all down, and it cuts to the chase, as far as I'm concerned. And it deserves to be on every list. It really does, you know.
I agree. It's reached a lot of people. It eventually found me. And what I love about that book is that the teachings of that book are just very simple, easy to digest, easy to remember.
Yeah.
At least the, you know, each agreement is explained very thoroughly within the book, but the essence of each agreement is very simple, that you can just take that little bite-sized nugget and just carry it with you in your heart, and just remind yourself, oh, be impeccable with my word. Was it what I just said? Was I being impeccable with my word? Or one I use often is, don't take things personally.
Mm.
You know, I think it's part of my wiring to take things more personally than I need to. And
Yeah.
so just to be reminded of that in a very simple way, it allows me in a moment of when I need it the most to just flip that switch and change my perspective and my view. So yeah, very, very grateful for
Mm.
that piece of literature. It's great.
Me too. Me too. The number of times I have to stop and say, oops, I wasn't, I made an assumption there or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. We're human, right?
Yeah. Works in progress.
That's right.
Yeah. So number 10, quite a different book. The Way of Qigong, The Art and Science of Chinese Energy Healing by Kenneth Cohen. And there it is. Yeah.
There it is. Love it. Since I've become a Qigong instructor, it's just been really important for me to read about the topic, read about it from different perspectives, different points of view, because everyone has a different way of expressing and teaching. And sometimes, depending upon the messenger, will determine how one can absorb the message. And
Mm.
so I love the way Kenneth speaks about Qigong and the history of it and the power of it. I love it. And I've read this book a couple of times and I continue to go back to it as a resource for me and my understanding of Qigong, because it's just one of those things that it's just such a vast topic. I know for me, I'll never know everything about it. And there are things that I see in this book when I'm reading it over again that I don't remember from the last time I read it. So it's like, oh, and I see it in a completely different way. So that's pretty magical because there's just something very mystical about Qigong and the history of it and the story of it. And I just love the way that he tells the story of it.
It was interesting because when I was looking it up, it said something about, Chinese have long treasured it for its effectiveness both in healing and in preventing disease. And more recently, they've used it in conjunction with modern medicine to cure cancer, immune system disorders, and other life-threatening conditions.
Absolutely. I mean, it's powerful medicine. It's powerful medicine. It's one of those things too that in order for the medicine to work for you, you don't have to fully understand it. That there's just something about just engaging with the medicine, with the qigong, and in conjunction with acupuncture and herbs and dietary suggestions, and the medicine is quite powerful and it does its thing. There's an innate knowledge and intelligence within the body that when you introduce this modality, this medicine, this energy healing, that it just does what it's designed to do.
And you actually got to meet him, Kenneth Cohen, at the Omega Institute.
I did. I met him. I met Robert Peng, and I met another gentleman whose name right now escapes me, but he's definitely one of those leading teachers of Qigong, at least here in America. So yeah, it was pretty amazing to be in the lunchroom and look across the room and say, I think that's kind of going.
Well, that brings us to the end of your list. If you were asked to recommend one book from your list to somebody who is starting out on their spiritual path, which of the 10 would you start them off with?
Definitely wouldn't be Sexual Outlaw. Start with the Four Agreements. How about that?
That's a good one. Honestly, that is, the old, is it the Rudyard Kipling poem, If, that everybody quotes all the time? I mean, those 4 agreements, something that we should be teaching in school. It should just be, every child should be exposed to them. Yeah.
Imagine, everyone just imagine what Sandie just said a moment ago. Just imagine the world like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So now I'm going to move on to keywords or phrases. Now we ask everybody to give us some keywords, how they would describe themselves. Most people pick stuff from their bio and they might add one little, more relaxed keyword. You've given me nothing but insights into yourself with these. You know, you haven't said dancer, you haven't said teacher, you haven't said any of those things. You've said seeker, nature lover, foodie, mover and shaker, and a friend of furry creatures. Now, I want you to give me one more that only your really close friends and loved ones know. Something they say about you, a descriptor, that you feel comfortable sharing, that is.
Tender.
Tender. Yeah. That is an incredible word to use to describe you, and it's one of the first words that comes to my mind when I think about you. You are a very tender soul, a very tender soul. And, you know, having had the privilege of getting to know you over the past 3 or 4 years, socially through Lee, we've spent time together, and hearing about some of the experiences in your childhood, I can see, you know, that you were a very sensitive child. You are a very sensitive human being. And in learning to deal with that sensitivity, you haven't lost your tenderness.
You're gonna make me cry, Sandie.
But it's true, Stephen.
Yes.
So, you know, own it. It's just, you know, one of your beautiful inspirational qualities.
Thank you.
It's one of the reasons why I wanted you to give us your list.
Thank you for seeing me.
Yeah. And I think everybody who's with us tonight and everybody who watches this afterwards will have the opportunity to see you. So what I'm going to do is throw it open now for questions or for comments. You've made me think of how we can find courage in books to be ourselves. I needed that. She's come undone. Loved it. Annalisa shares that there was an amazing documentary about Toni Morrison that she watched last year. It was astounding what a character and a woman. She was a teacher before a writer. And Annalisa loves the way she was so animated and intense in interviews. I don't think I've ever seen an interview with her.
Oh, you should definitely watch some interviews with her.
Yeah.
She's a brilliant mind and very, very honest and very courageous. There was something very courageous about her in her writing and in her interviews. Yeah.
Yeah. She also says, Annalisa also says, she would really make sure that the usually white interviewers understood her completely. And that is a very important and a very powerful thing for her, you know, to do, to make sure that she did, because, you know, how can we understand the Black experience? We can't. The only way that we can understand it is, you know, when you share your experiences and your perceptions with us. And then, you know, if we're empathetic enough, we can do our best to put ourselves in the shoes and, you know, experience that in some minor form, but hopefully enough to get an idea of what that was like. So yeah, I will. I'll look out some of her interviews. I think that would be very interesting. Annalisa also says she too found Codependent No More life-changing, and she continues to work on this aspect of herself.
Me too.
Francis says, questions at the end. It's so inspiring to hear that you were open at such a young age to explore something about yourself that many people would have judged. But instead of shutting down, you searched for understanding. I love your honesty and deepness. Are you ever inspired to express your spirituality through dance? And when were you the most inspired by dance?
Well, I think that I've always expressed my spirituality through dance. I think that's just a natural part of me. And because dance is such a natural part of me as well, that comes through as well. I think that people who've watched me dance have had a bit of a spiritual experience in the moment of watching, like the way you describe your feeling of watching me dance. There's something very spiritual about that.
Yeah.
So I do so without the intention of it. Maybe now I have I don't even know. I'm going to correct myself. I'm not even going to say what I was just going to say, because I think that it's always a part of me, because it is a part of who I am. It shows up in everything that I do. I think I teach Pilates in a spiritual way. I think I teach Qigong in a spiritual way. I think I write in a spiritual way.
What does spirituality mean to you?
That's a very good question. It's a very good question.
I'm not sure we ever get asked this question, or ask it of ourselves, because it is something that we consider ourselves to be, but to try and define it.
Yeah. What comes to mind is something that I heard the other day. Someone speak about the difference between religion and spirituality, that religion has to do with people wanting to avoid going to hell and doing all that they can to avoid going to hell. And spirituality is for those who've already been to hell and found their way out of it. And that was told from a perspective of recovery. And so for me, spirituality is very much about that inward journey for me. But it's that inward journey that allows me to have insights on the world around me, because I feel as though what's inside of me is also reflected outside of me as well. So being able to see that connection between me and you, between myself and that tree, between myself and my cat, our cats. For me today, it's as simple and as complex as that.
We have another message from Frances. She says, speaking of books and beautiful, soothing voices, have you ever narrated a book on tape? Your voice is so listenable and compelling.
My voice or Sandie?
Your voice, not me, your voice. Your voice.
Well, because of the work that I do now, especially since Lee and I joined forces and fell in love and began to work together, I've recorded many meditations. I've recorded many voiceovers for online courses that I've made, and also for other projects that I've created for other people and organizations. So I've had many opportunities to record my voice and to share it with other people. And I absolutely have thought about narrating a book, or doing a recorded, doing an audio book or something like that. And I'm sure I will at some point. And it's funny, I have a friend that I've become reacquainted with that I used to dance with in Lion King. And it's been lovely to reconnect with her. And she's an actress now. She does a lot of voiceover work. And I asked her, I said, oh, it'd be interesting to talk to you about voiceover work and how you got into that. And because I've often thought about that. And I feel as though I'm already doing all that, but I'm doing it for myself. I'm not waiting for someone to hire me to record the sound of my voice and deliver it to people. I'm not out there auditioning. I'm just making work that speaks to me and putting it out there for people to take it or leave it or enjoy it. So yeah, I don't feel a need to go out there and become a voiceover artist, because I already am one in my own right for my own work, which is pretty empowering, which is very different from where I was when I was an actor or a dancer in New York, auditioning, just dying for people to like me and want me and hire me. It's like, much better where I am right now.
We have a question from Jane. When or how did you discover your higher self?
When or how? Well, I would say my first experiences conscious experiences of it was through my recovery journey. When I was getting sober, there was just something that happened for me during that process of falling to my knees with addiction, asking for help, putting it out there that I needed help, having conversations with my higher power, my higher self, and responding to the intuitions that I would have about what's the next right thing for me to do. That was the beginning of it for me, and then the rest is history. 18 years later, I feel like that was the beginning of it for me in a very conscious way, in a way that is very much in alignment with who I am. Any kind of religion or spirituality that I, learned as a kid, I do believe that my higher power and I, that we are one. Yeah.
So we have a message from Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie says, thank you for a very interesting interview and being so honest. Lots of things resonated, including being a sensitive. My list of books is getting longer and longer. No excuse to just stand in front of a bookstore wondering what to read next. Good, that's the whole point of this book club. It's, as far as I'm concerned, books are just, they're it. I'd be lost without them. Absolutely lost without them. I look forward to every single one that, I choose to read. Stephen Washington, it has been such a delight talking with you. It's the first chance we've actually ever had to talk alone without Lee around and it's lovely to be able to connect with you in this way.
Same. Really lovely to spend this time with you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for asking me months ago to do this. And when you asked me, I didn't know that there would be this component as well. And this has really been a gift. Thank you for spending this hour with me.
Thank you, Stephen. And thank you to everybody else for joining us. If you want to be notified and you're not already signed up for the Save My Space list, which is completely separate from the other list, go over to the video interview page and you can do that now. We send out special little emails, last minute reminders, etc., to people who specifically have indicated that they want to join these particular events. We also are putting audio versions of these up on Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, and goodness knows how many other podcast sites. So if you prefer listening to things in your car while you're, doing work around the house or whatever, at leisure time, you can always download those as well. So that's it for today. We'll be back again next week. I hope you'll join me. Stephen, thank you again.